Srila Prabhupada called San Francisco New Jagannath Puri. So devotees would come from all over the world to attend the Rath Yatra because Srila Prabhupada was there and in attendance. There was no Rath Yatras in Australia or Tokyo or Los Angeles, New York, so people would come from all over the world. And so it was a great occasion for the devotees to come together and celebrate that festival with Srila Prabhupada. Yeah, this is in front of the 518 Frederick Street. This is right on the sidewalk in front of Frederick Street. Devotees painting the canopy and upholstering the asans. This was the biggest festival that was ever held in ISKCON in the early days, 1970 Rath Yatra. It was like this monster. Out of this little storefront, we created this huge publicity campaign, and we mobilized the whole city of San Francisco.
All of this happened, all these three huge rock cards, all generated out of this little teeny San Francisco center. You know, you really couldn't call it a temple. It was just a storefront. Yeah, teeny. Imagine the energy and and there was no consideration of yourself. You just never thought about yourself. Oh, I'm tired. Oh, I'm wet. Oh, I'm cold. You just got on with it. You couldn't disappoint Prabhupada. At the time, I was a new devotee, been a devotee about 4 months. Of course, I'd been hearing Prabhupada's lectures and reading his books and listening to some of the recordings, and there was a lot of anticipation about Rath Yatra in general, but the airport, we went to the airport to greet him. There was just so many devotees there, and we were just having this huge kirtan, waiting for Prabhupada to come.
I had joined in '69 at 518 Frederick Street, but I couldn't stay because I was a Canadian. So I went back up to Canada and moved into the temple in Vancouver, and I stayed there for 6 months. We came down for Rath Yatra, and by that time I was really psyched up. You're meeting the spiritual master of the universe. You've been wandering throughout the universe for millions of lifetimes. Now, with this meeting, your karma, everything is going to be relieved. So I was quite excited.
You know, we're waiting for the plane to come in, and Prabhupada was coming off the plane, and he was walking up. It seemed like to me he was by himself. Maybe there were some devotees in the background, but the image I have is Prabhupada was walking up this plank, and he had this very innocent expression. I had never really seen a person exemplify that kind of humility before, because he was walking up and he had this expression as if to like turn around and see who everyone had come to meet. But I got all the temple presidents to spend like $100 each and buy these white gardenias, those big, beautiful, highly scented gardenias. Each president stepped forward and gave him a huge white gardenia, just covered with gardenias. His eyes were very penetrating, something about his eyes. It seems like Krishna Bhakti comes from his eyes or something, but just for a second feeling his glance and just feeling the depth of that glance and the intensity of emotion that everyone felt. We were just caught up, and everyone around me and myself, tears were just coming from our eyes, and just seeing a person who had characteristics that I'd never experienced before, and feeling the intensity of the kirtan, and it was very moving to this day. We used to be able to do that. Go into an airport and just rock it down, you know.
everything was for Prabhupada. We didn't know anything else. We didn't know anyone else. We were like clean slates. He taught us everything. We had no outside influence. Look at that. He's dancing right in the airport. Why? Because he got a wonderful welcome, and the devotees were so enthusiastic. So, you reciprocated. And the more you could do for him, the more he would reciprocate in kind.
That's the lot. 3 carts are being built in that lot. This is where Srila Prabhupada came to visit the Rath Yatra cart. And he amazed all the devotees. He just laid out flat on the dirt and paid his obeisances to the Rath Yatra cart. He said, the Rath is as good as the deity. You can see Jayananda and Naranarayana there.
Here it is, the moment of truth, actually. You see, we're pulling the Rath Yatra cars out into the street, more or less in front of the temple on 518 Frederick Street. I'm in the middle of all of this because I figure if anyone's going to get squashed, I'm the designer and architect, and I should be the one to get squashed. When we had finally built them and realized how massive they were, we were scared stiff as to what would happen when we took them off the blocks and started rolling them down the hill. We thought they would continue to roll and go right through the temple door and out the back and down into the bay. I might add, it had no brakes whatsoever, and therefore if it had gotten away, it would have gotten away. What we did with the paint was we used natural earth pigments. I took deep tone latex base and mixed the pigments with water and had it shaken up with the paint place. And so what we did was we used the same pigmentation that they use in Jagannath Puri. You see how many men it was required to break the Rath Yatra car. All of this was designed and built custom within a matter of a few weeks. I think we had about 6 or 8 weeks in which we built everything from scratch. And we were able to acquire lumber. We've spent very little cash for lumber. Most of it was acquired from donation, and wood was left inadvertently lying around.
Srila Prabhupada sent Narnarayan up to design the carts. And I remember one meeting that Narnarayan was walking around the room holding his head, and Srila Prabhupada said, well, what was the matter? Because you could see Narnarayan was in anxiety. And he told Srila Prabhupada that he needed special empowerment. He felt he needed a special empowerment in order to do these carts. And he told Prabhupada it had to come in a name. So Prabhupada told him, all right, then for this, now you have become Vishwakarma, the architect of the universe. And Narnarayan lit up, and that was all he needed to get his inspiration for figuring out how to build all the 3 cars, because he had to invent the scopes for the domes coming down.
The tops were designed so that the whole Rath Yatra car could slip under a 15-foot high overpass. So the entire part came down. We had it all designed the year before. We just took a pole and lowered it down, but that cart was only 35 feet tall. These were like over 60 feet tall. And so we just were building it. We didn't think. And then Srila Prabhupada was in Los Angeles. He happened to talk to Tamal and said, and how is the lowering mechanism going to be used, designed? And Tamal said, oh, Narnarayan is working on that. He knows all about it. He's a genius engineer. He can do it, So Srila Prabhupada said to Tamal, so who is checking on Narnarayan? And Tamal said, oh, you don't have to check on Narnarayan. He knows what he's doing. And Prabhupada said, why not ask? So Tamal phoned up. He said, I hate to ask you this, it's so silly, but how are you doing the mechanism? How is it raising up? And we said, well, we're just, we hadn't thought of how to do it. So Lochan, myself, Madhavisa, and Jayananda, we all sat there for 4 days without sleeping, day and night, not able to figure out how to raise that top. And finally, some or other it came to me how to make this telescoping tube that could be raised up in increments, which is sort of the model that's been used ever since, except it's been made, much more sophisticated since then, much better design. And then Prabhupada said sternly, no one should ever be in charge completely of something. There should be a committee to make sure. Because Prabhupada, if anyone, had tremendous confidence in what I could do, and Tamal had complete confidence in what I could do, and yet I had made the biggest blunder that could have destroyed the whole festival if we had not stopped and worked that out.
When he first came to the temple, I wasn't very conscious of who he was, because I was a brand new devotee. And he came into the temple room, and everyone paid their obeisances, and when everyone had their heads down, I looked up at Srila Prabhupada, and he laughed, he smiled at me, and it was the first realization that I ever had, that he was the first person that ever loved me. That was very clear, that he was the first person in my life that had ever loved me, and that he knew clearly who I was, and everything about me. I felt, he saw right through me, whatever. Not in a bad way, not like saw through my artificiality, but saw who I really was. And that was a very, very special thing. And then, everyone sat down and he spoke a little bit, and then, someone brought him a plate of sweets, and I remember he took a galabjaman and he tossed it in his mouth from his lap. It was so incredible. I've tried it in the past, and it just lands on my forehead or over my shoulder, but it was so incredible to watch him. Everything he did was so perfect and aristocratic.
Oh, these are the horses. Well, this is interesting. My father made the horses. My father's a dramatic Holocaust survivor. His heart had flames coming out of it from the Holocaust in the Warsaw Ghetto. And so he built these horses. He painted them with fire and with smoke. They looked as though they were smoldering. And he put them on the front of the Rath Yatra cars, which was quite a contribution. So 4 for each Rath Yatra car. I wanted to engage him, so I asked him to do it. But when I saw the horses, I was absolutely horrified. They looked like horses of the apocalypse coming out of hell. So my father was very proud of them. They were rather dramatic horses. My parents, I should say, were separated for 40 years. So my mother was also at the Rath Yatra festival, and my mother and father hadn't seen each other for, maybe 5 years, My mother walks up and said, "Who has made these horses?" She recoils in horror, seeing these smoldering, burned, crazed horses with wild rolling eyes. "Who has made these horses?" And I look at her and say, "My dad made them." She said, "Well, this will never do." So she went and grabbed buckets of paint and painted them all up with nice, the merry-go-round design, caparisoned and white and clean and healthy-looking horses. And there they looked at these horses together, and they sort of felt, yes, this is what we've done to honor our son's choice. And I could see that they both felt great satisfaction. And from my perspective, as a budding transcendentalist, 2 years in the movement, I thought, this is their devotional service. This is the moment that was created for them by Lord Krishna to accomplish something in their lives and to give my brother and myself permission to go forward with the power of the Pitris behind us.
I got the Krishna book published in Japan by Dainapan. I had to go there to supervise. This is the first book with color photos. This was very special. The windows to the spiritual world. I went there, I think it was May, and I told Dainapan, I met with all the executives, that there was a festival in July, and I wanted to bring the book, the finished book, to the festival in San Francisco. So it meant that it had 2 months to produce the book. And they said, impossible. I said, well, there is no impossible. You have to do it. Because I want to present the book to the spiritual master at the festival. And they said, well, it's impossible, but anyway, we'll try. So they worked so hard. And I would go every day and push them. Every day I would ask them, you going to have it ready? You going to have it ready? It's impossible. It's impossible. And then I booked my return flight to arrive in San Francisco the day of Rath Yatra. And actually, they didn't have it ready. And I said, this is going to have a serious repercussions for our future business with you and so on. And then I went to the airport. So as I was walking up the stairs to get on the plane, limousine drove out onto the tarmac. It had flags on it. You know, Dynapon was one of the largest companies in Japan. They printed Time magazine. This long black limousine. And it comes right to the airplane. And out come all the Dynapon executives, you know, in their blue suits, about 5 of them. So I went down, and they all bowing, you know, from the waist, and they gave me this carton. You know, the stewardess is saying, come on, you know, you got to get on the plane, you know, they had to take off. So I just took the carton, I thanked them, and got on the plane. You know, couldn't wait for the plane to take off, and tore open the carton, and there's this silver, shiny Krishna book. It was so ecstatic. Then I start going through the book, looking at every pictures, and you know how it all turned out. And there was this man next to me. He was a business executive, American. And he saw me. He said, you know, what do you got there? And I said, oh, this is, you know, my spiritual master. I printed the book in Japan. It was our first book. And he said, how much is it? And I said, whatever. I said, $10 or something, which was a good amount of things. He said, okay, I'll take it. So then, you know, I came to San Francisco, went right away to Prabhupada's apartment. And I brought in the carton, presented the book to Prabhupada. Prabhupada was so pleased that he said, you know, how many copies do you have? I said, well, there were 20, but now there's only 19. He said, oh, only 19? What happened to the other one? I said, well, I sold it on the plane. The person next to me. Prabhupada said, oh, very good. This is very auspicious. The first copy was distributed. Then he ordered, he said, all these books, there were only 19 of them. He said, these should all be distributed at the Rath Yatra. And then the one that he had in his hand, and he said, and this one also.
You couldn't see the deities until they were on the rough cart. It was one of our technicalities that we thought, you know, had to be there. And no one should view the deities until, it's like, you know, it was like looking at prasadam before you offer it. So nobody's going to see the deities until they get on the Rath Yatra cart. And then, when they were all up on the cart, then they would be, you know, revealed in all their magnificence.
I think there was some disturbances going on, and Prabhupada had given Vishnu Jan the Nrsimha prayers, and Vishnu Jan had just been up with Prabhupada and came down, and we were on the street right in front of the temple, and Vishnu Jan said to all of us that Prabhupada had given him this mantra for protection of the festival, and right on the street he taught us, and I think this is the first time we chanted the Nrsimha prayers.
Myself and Gargamuni and others there, we did not want Prabhupada to go to the Rath Yatra festival. What happened was that we got threats. The Black Panthers sent word that we're going to attack your guru if you hold this festival. And they were very credible threats. So we were afraid. So we told Prabhupada that, you know, you shouldn't go to the festival. But Prabhupada couldn't accept this. First of all, he didn't care so much about threats. But second, it was just inconceivable that Prabhupada would not go to the Rath Yatra. And Prabhupada insisted on going. And I was insisting Prabhupada not go. So Prabhupada insisted, you know, you must take me. So Gargamuni was driving the car, and he drove very slowly, and he took a very roundabout route in order to arrive late at the festival.
Things started out well, but they quickly got worse. One of the carts had a certified weld that cracked, and Balaram's cart was out of commission. The newspapers wrote an article called Harried Krishna. That was just after we were attacked by the Black Panthers. And so they had all these Black Panthers all in afros, black t-shirts, and black pants. And they attacked with some martial arts. So Brahmananda and others were fighting them. And we had poles to keep them from getting crushed under the Rath Yatra cars, very beautifully decorated poles. So we used these poles to fend them off. My father was dressed like an Old Testament prophet of old with his white beard, and he was stood there, and he had a staff. He was crashing it onto the ground, crying, "Tolerance! Tolerance! Tolerance!" We marched literally 7 miles to the sea. At one point there were cars parked on either side, and I cried out, "Move the cars!" And 25 people would grab each car and just send it skittering. Now Subhadra's cart had an interesting miracle attached to it as well. What happened is we came along, and Shamasundar had used a piece of malleable iron as the axle for Subhadra's cart. And it had started to get worn through after 2 years of Rath Yatras, which we weren't aware of. So we warned everyone not to ride on Subhadra's cart because we were worried about it not being strong. But guess what? People got on anyhow, and the wheel bent almost horizontal. We thought, oh no, we've lost Balaram's cart. Now we've lost Subhadra's cart. What on earth are we going to do? So, it suddenly occurred to me, and I said, wait a minute. I want 50 people to lift Subhadra's cart, and 50 people rushed forward and lifted Subhadra's cart. And I want another 50 people to grab the wheel and bend it down again. And they did. They came and they took the wheel, and that piece of iron that was 2.5 inches thick, they just bent it back again so the wheel was perfectly vertical. And I said, now I want another 50 people to guard it so nobody gets on. And nobody got on.
When Prabhupada arrived at Rath Yatra in the middle of Golden Gate Park, all the devotees stopped. Srila Prabhupada was supposed to give a lecture at the beginning of the Rath Yatra festival, but because there was some disturbance at that time, Prabhupada delayed his arrival, and he entered Golden Gate Park up the road about a mile or so from the beginning, and then walked back towards the Rath Yatra cart and took everybody by surprise. Prabhupada had many garlands that were given to him, and he took one of his garlands off, and he looked for Jayananda, and he garlanded Jayananda with the flower garland that was given to him, making that benediction to Jayananda. Prabhupada began to dance in a circle. You see Prabhupada's flowing robes. Bhavananda picked out the fabric for that cloth.
And I saw this really nice shimmery peach silk satin cloth. But it was actually, I think, like an upholstery cloth. But it was beautiful. So I wanted that, so I bought that. And I insisted, my visa was tearing his sea gown. I insisted on buying real pearls. I wanted to make real pearl buttons and a real pearl button on the side. You know, the little strap that goes under his chin on his Prabhupada hat? A real pearl there. So Madhavisa, mumbling and grumbling, gave me the money. And when Madhavisa brought the cloth over, Prabhupada looked at it and said, "As you dress me, so I shall dance." Yeah, it was wonderful.
He gave instructions about the dancing, I know that. For that year, I think it was 1970, that he told the devotees how to dance. In front of the deities, specifically, based on the descriptions that are in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. At that time, the Chaitanya Charitamrita was not available. In one group, Lord Nityananda would be the dancer in front of one chariot, and another chariot, I think it was a Jyoitacharya, may have been the dancer, like that. It's basically for the pleasure of the deity, then you have an ecstatic dancer, not to impress the crowd, but in Krishna consciousness for the specific pleasure of the deity.
Prabhupada was showing the devotees that he liked to dance. Not just the Swami step, but jumping up and down. That was a new revelation. He introduced that at Lasiyanaga Boulevard Temple, at the temple. He had introduced the jumping. Before the Swami step was the conservative dance step that was used by everybody. But when Prabhupada started to jump at the Lasiyanaga Boulevard Temple in Los Angeles, that's when jumping became part of the choreography of the temple.
At the start of the procession, we had speakers on Subhadра's car, and Jivananda and I and a couple other devotees were sitting in the back with microphones to have kirtan over the microphone. Then Prabhupada sent word back that he didn't want the speakers anymore, and he just wanted kirtan parties in the crowd like in India. So Jivananda and I turned the speakers off, hopped out, and started doing kirtan.
We marched literally 7 miles to the sea. Nobody thought of complaining or why don't we have buses to take us or something. People marched 7 miles to the sea, and when they got there at the Family Dog Auditorium, which is run by Chet Holmes, who did all the Janis Joplin, Grateful Dead concerts and the movie Grave and Quicksilver and all that. I heard those horses again. He let us use that place, and there were 10,000 people waiting at the beach who hadn't wanted to go through the ordeal of marching.
I was helping to cook, and then I went down to the Family Dog Auditorium, where Srila Prabhupada was going to come after. Now, there were so many people that would participate, actually, that we filled the Family Dog Auditorium, and simultaneously the beach was also filled with people, and we were distributing prasadam in both places. Big kirtans were going on in both places. And I was in the Family Dog when Srila Prabhupada arrived. And it was just so wonderful. Srila Prabhupada was such a swan amongst men. And he floated into the Family Dog Auditorium. There were literally thousands and thousands of hippies present. And they were all in their full regalia, because this was a big event for them. So just ordinarily in that day, people's dress was interesting enough. But for this Rath Yatra festival, they really decked themselves out. Many dressed as Radha and Krishna and similar costumes like that. So Srila Prabhupada came amongst this. He walked onto the stage, and he looked out amongst the throngs of hippies, and he smiled. Then he said, "I have come to make all the hippies into happies." And that evoked a tremendous tumult of transcendental roaring from all the devotees that were present. And everyone got swept away in this wave, this tidal wave of ecstasy that was coming from Srila Prabhupada's heart, and danced for hours and hours and hours. Vishnujan would just be chanting and swooning, and then he would just cry out, just chant and dance, and when you're tired, take prasadam, and then come and chant and dance more. And that's literally what went on for hours and hours and hours.
There were so many unusual people there, and Srila Prabhupada explaining that the people in general had become hippies because they were disillusioned with modern society. But if they didn't find any guidance, then they would end up in a more difficult situation than the one that they had actually left. And he urged all of these hippies, drug-taking hippies, to take up his message of Krishna consciousness and actually become first-class human beings. It was an amazing experience for me. I think it was what cemented my understanding that I should stay within the Krishna consciousness family.
They assigned duties to everyone, and I was to be in charge of making the feast, with the idea of feeding between 5,000 and 10,000 people, maybe more. So, undaunted, I had never really cooked for large amounts of people, but in those days, we could climb Mount Everest and not be tired. Prabhupada's energy was just driving the movement so powerfully that if we were given a duty to do, it was nothing. It was a feast, actually, that Prabhupada requested. There was so much prasadam there. We had gotten truckloads of watermelons donated. So at the end, we just stopped slicing the watermelons and just started giving whole watermelons to take home with them or to serve out.
Family Dog Auditorium. It used to be the Shrine Auditorium. It was a Family Dog Auditorium. And Bhavananda had gotten a bunch of barbecue grills and filled them with briquettes and just bags and bags of frankincense incense. So the whole place was just billowing with frankincense incense. But I remember that a bunch of the Hells Angels followed us. They sort of got their fighting spirit out of them, and they followed the carts. So when we got to the Family Dog Auditorium, Prabhupada came on the stage a little bit later. We were all inside the auditorium. And when Prabhupada came in, all the devotees bowed down. And there was something so magnanimous and also heavy about Prabhupada's presence that so many other people bowed down. It's not an unusual occurrence that people would just instinctively bow down that here's a saintly person. And I remember that it was a wood floor, and when they bowed down, there was a couple of Hells Angels next to me, and their chains and billy clubs and everything fell out and hit the floor, and I was thinking how when all the Lord Brahmas, all bowed before Krishna and all their helmets, so I was thinking that Prabhupada and Kali Yuga, even the Hells Angels with all their billy clubs and helmets and everything. And Prabhupada started the lecture. It was the most amazing thing because they were hippies and college students and from UC Berkeley and San Jose State, and then there were these Hells Angels and there were Black Panthers, just such a montage. And Prabhupada started off his lecture by saying, "My dear frustrated youth of America." When Prabhupada danced, when we had kirtan inside the